At this point, you should have completed a value scale. So here I have my value scale. I'm going to be using this to assist me in the development of this project. So we completed a value scale to help you begin to develop basic shading skills, which are essential for any artist to use. You've practiced lightening the pressure on your pencil to develop the lighter values and using more pressure to create the darker values. You should at this point be picking up on the idea too that the more you overlap your pencil marks, the darker the value is going to be. So we're going to take these skills we've been developing and we're going to use them to create a drawing today. So you'll be using your shading skills and you're going to be using something called reductive drawing skills. Now that's a big fancy term for basically using an eraser in your drawing. And the term reductive comes from the fact that we're taking something away from the page. So we'll be using our erasers to lift the pencil or graphite off of the paper to aid us in the development of our drawing and actually make it more interesting. So let's go over the materials you're going to need for this. You want to have your value scale on hand. It's going to be a good reference tool for you to have. You're also going to need a clean white sheet of paper. This is just a thin sheet of white copy paper. It's 8.5 by 11. Yours doesn't have to be this exact size, but a thin sheet of white paper works well for this. You're also going to want to have a pencil and a variety of erasers. So you can have a bigger one on hand, but also have some smaller ones like you would find on the end of a pencil available. And you may want to have a tissue on hand to help you with your blending. Okay, so we're going to get started here and I'm going to move on to the next step. So for my next step, I'm actually going to be folding this paper in half, or you could just divide it in half with a line, whatever works for you, but I'm going to just fold mine in half. We're not going to do a great big drawing for this. I'm just folding that in half. And this is going to be the size I'm going to complete for my drawing, okay? The next step that we are going to do is we are going to use our value scale to help us establish the background and essential layer of our drawing for this. So we are going to be working to achieve about a 3 here in our background. Okay, so we're going to take a second and we're going to look at what that looks like. I'm going to get started and we'll come back. So you can see I've started working, layering on the graphite from my pencil. Yes, that is graphite inside of your pencil, even though most of the time it's referred to as lead, it's actually graphite. And we're just I'm just working to layer that onto my paper. And as I'm working, I am going in one direction. So I'm working diagonally. If you want to work horizontally or vertically, that's fine. But I would encourage you, especially for this background layer that we're putting on, to really move just in one direction. Now you can see that I'm about at a 2 on my value scale. So I'm going to build this up a little bit more. So it's going to be somewhere between a 2 and a 3 as far as the value goes. So I'm going to continue to layer that on. I'm going to attempt to try and keep it pretty consistent throughout the background. So working in one direction, you can move pretty quickly for this. You can see that my hand on my pencil is a little bit higher up. Remember that if you hold it too far down, that's going to really change the amount of pressure you're putting. You have a tight grip, you're not going to be able to layer that on loosely, which is what we want to do now. So my hand is up high and I am just moving quickly back and forth across that paper, trying to build up enough of the graphite to achieve somewhere between a 2 and a 3 on my value scale. So I'm going to come back in a minute once I feel that I'm pretty satisfied with the amount of graphite that's there, and I'm going to show you the next step. So at this point, I've spent about probably 5 minutes, give or take, layering on the graphite, and what we see now is that this is between a 2 and a 3. It's almost a 3. So my suggestion to you, if you're having a hard time figuring out if you've put enough graphite in, is err on the side of going a little too dark, just a touch too dark. So once you feel like you're there or you're nearly there, you can go ahead and take a tissue or some toilet paper, or maybe even a cotton ball if you have one of those. I would definitely start with a tissue and you're going to begin to just use that tissue to blend out the graphite to help even out the color and really blend that out. Now, after you do this, you may see that you need to go back on to the paper and layer on some more graphite, because what you'll see is that this is lifting off some of the color as we're blending it. And remember, the reason I'm not using my fingers is because our fingers have oils in them. And the oils can deposit onto the paper, and then what happens is you get these blotches on your paper where the graphite doesn't lift off in the same manner. It's not the end of the world if you use your fingers, but especially like for me in the winter, which it is right now, my hands are often dry. I put a lot of lotion on. I definitely am not going to be using my fingers for blending, because I know that at this point, if I do that, I'm probably going to be leaving behind some deposits of oil. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and blend this out. Make sure that you've layered it up so that you have a reasonably dark background. And you want it to be fairly consistent, though it does not have to be perfect. You can see I probably put my hand on here at some point, and we're seeing what's happening with the oil and the graphite sticking a little bit there. It's not going to ruin the drawing though. Okay, so I may go in and add a little bit more graphite to mine, maybe just a touch, and then I'll come back and I'm going to show you the next step. Okay, so I'm reasonably happy with the background, so I'm going to move on to the next step. For the next step, I want you to find something in your house that is round, okay? Whether that is a roll of tape or a coaster, a coffee cup, whatever it is, I want you to find something round that is approximately, it doesn't have to be exactly, but approximately between 3 and 4 inches. So this is about 3 1/4 inches across. I've also used a roll of tape for this in the past. This is about 3 1/2 inches. So something between 3 and 4 inches. Once you find that, I want you to put that somewhere near the center of the paper. Actually, let's put it off center just a little bit. So I'm going to move this over to the right-hand side just a bit. A little bit off center. So if this is the center, this is off center right about here. I'm not going to have it too low, so it's not going to be at the bottom of the paper. It's also not going to be too high up to the top. So I would say about 1 inch from the bottom. And this is all give or take. These are approximations. I didn't actually measure that. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your pencil and very lightly sketch or trace, I should say, around that circle. And you should have a pretty light outline of a circle. You don't want it too dark, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to darken this circle area in to about a 4. We don't want it at a 5. We definitely want it a little bit darker than the 3, because if we don't have it darker than the 3, our drawing's not going to work so well. So go ahead in and you're going to darken this up to about a level 4. So I'm going to start that and we'll come back in a minute and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm getting close to having finished this. So I'm going to go in and show you just some technique, tricks, or tips, if you will. So when you're shading this value in, so we're shooting for the 4. Now we're moving our hand down our pencil so that we have more pressure as we're shading. I'm still going in one direction for this, and as I get closer to the edge, I'm going to slow down even more. And if you go outside of the lines, it's not the end of the world, but you're going to try and stay within that circle. So I'm slowing down. I am moving in the same direction, a circular direction, as I begin to shade those edges. Now, when you're in the center, of course, you can go a little bit faster, but remember, as you're working along the edges, you want to go slowly so that you're not going outside of that circle that you've drawn. This is going to help us create our subject matter. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this, and we'll come back and we will start the next step. Now, once you have this shaded, if you want to go in with your tissue to blend it, go ahead and do that, but again, stay inside of the circle. Okay, we'll move on in just a minute. Okay, so I have finished shading in my circle, and it's about the same value as a 4, maybe a touch dark. They look fairly close. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my reductive drawing. And again, reductive drawing just means that we are actually using our eraser to lift off the value from the graphite and to create a new value. So essentially we're going to be creating either a 2 or a 1, depending on how well our erasers work as we lift off the graphite. Now, our subject matter, meaning the focus of our artwork, is actually going to be a ball of yarn. Yes, that's right. I said it's going to be a ball of yarn. Might sound a little boring to you, but I actually think it is a lot of fun to do this, and it's a fun exercise in my opinion, but I love most things art related. So I'm going to be using a reference image to help guide me through this drawing process, which I'm going to put up on the screen for you, and I will give access to you in your Google Classroom and on Flipgrid so that you can use that while you're working as well. So let's get started in just a second. Okay, so I've got my reference image up, and I'm going to use that to help me start drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be using my eraser to come in, and you can follow along with me for a little bit, and then I'm going to let you go and do this on your own. I'm going to start by putting in the lines of the yarn that curve this direction. So I am going to press with my pencil, and I'm going to curve that line. You may want to try a couple different erasers. Some erasers, especially if they're old and will dry, don't work nearly as well. Okay, so I'm curving that line, and I am lifting off the graphite. And you may want to do a couple of passes over the lines that you do. So I'm going to continue to look at my reference drawing, or reference image I should say, because it's not a drawing, it's a photograph. And I am going to have that there as I work to guide where I'm putting these lines with my eraser. You definitely want to be curving these because that's going to help create the dimension or illusion that this is three-dimensional on your paper. And in art, three-dimensional does not mean that it's popping off the page. What it means is it's giving the illusion of 3 dimensions, so height, width, and depth. Okay, I'm going to continue to work on this. Now, you do want to leave a little bit of gray between the lines. If too much of that gray goes away, your drawing will not be as successful. So the thinner the eraser is, the thinner your line will be. The thicker your eraser is, the thicker your line will be. Okay, so I'm going to keep working, and we'll see what this looks like in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I've got some new erasers, and I'm going to keep working. So I'm pressing here, lifting up, hopping over to the other side, and finishing the line. And I am continuing to look at my reference image to help me figure out what direction the lines are moving. So I'm just very, very gently moving that eraser off of the paper. And then I'm going to go back in and refine any little bits and pieces that I want to adjust. And I'm going to do one more thing, which is I am going to draw a piece of yarn coming out of the ball of yarn, just like we see in our reference image, or similar to it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and add a really dark shadow underneath the yarn ball. So we're looking for our 5 to happen here. I may put it in a slightly different spot than what you see in the reference image, just because I feel like it, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and keep working, and we'll come back and see the final product here in a minute. So I think I'm just about done here. What you may have noticed if you're a fairly observant student is that this has changed since the last time you had a look at it. So just a few things that you can try doing when you go back into your work. If you want to make some of the areas pop a little bit more, you can go back in, especially in those areas where you see that there would have been some overlapping of the yarn happening, and add in a little bit of shading on top, just a touch. You can go back into areas where maybe your eraser lines got too close together and you have too much white showing through, and you can just pop in a line with your pencil, okay? So these are some things that I went back in and did to my own work, and that you may want to think about adding into your work if you think it's going to enhance it, okay? So hopefully you've had some practice here with your shading skills, and you've seen how an eraser can be used as well as an essential drawing tool, because erasers really are an important part of the shading process. So your goal in this piece when you're done is to have at least hopefully 3 different values, if not 4. So hopefully you have your darkest dark, okay, so that should probably be your shadow right under here, and you can continue to build that up as necessary. So you have your darkest dark, you have your white, or your brightest value, okay? So that's 2. You should have a 3 in the background, okay? And then you should have about a 4 inside of the yarn ball. So we should have established at least 4 values. One other thing I think I'm gonna go ahead and give a shot doing is a little bit more of that reductive method with my eraser, and I'm going to use again my reference image to kind of guide where I'm going in with this, and I'm going to begin just gently lifting off some of that value. And when I'm done, hopefully I'll like it, and I'll give you a final shot of what this piece looks like when it's finished. Okay, so here is my finished yarn ball with a little bit more of reductive method happening here, pulling out some of the color with my eraser, building out the shadow a little bit more, adding in a few extra details as necessary, as I talked about before. And there you have it. There is the final yarn ball. I can't wait to see how yours turned out and what you came up with.